So what is the relationship between an allele, genotype, and phenotype? Well, by having an allele, it tells us the genotype. And then this genotype will tell us the phenotype. The genotype is going to tell us the genes, and the phenotype is going to tell us the physical characteristics. Along with alleles telling us the genotypes, and also the genotypes used to tell us the physical characteristics as the phenotypes, they are shown in different ways. So for a genotype, you'll have a capital letter. In this case, I'm going to use F. And a capital letter means that it's a dominant allele. A lowercase letter, which is this small f, means that it's a recessive allele. In this case, is capital F is going to mean that if you have that allele, you're going to have freckles. And if you have two recessive alleles, then that means that you're going to have no freckles. So also note that if you have a recessive allele, this recessive allele is masked by a dominant allele. So that is showing the relationship between an allele, genotype, and a phenotype. So now let's look at combinations of alleles. So if you have different combinations of alleles, we're going to show them as a genotype. The genotype is the gene, and it's going to tell us the phenotype, just like we had talked about before. So if we have two alleles that are dominant, two capital Fs, that means, or that is called a homozygous. It is called homozygous dominant. And if you have two dominant alleles, in this case, that means the individual will have freckles. If you have a capital F and a lowercase f, this is a heterozygous, or this means you have heterozygous. And because you have a recessive allele and dominant allele, the recessive allele is going to be masked by the dominant allele. So the phenotype here would be that you have freckles. And then the last combination of alleles is going to be two lowercase f's. And this would mean that it would be homozygous recessive. Homozygous recessive means that you would have, or this individual would have, no freckles. Okay, so that's how you would read the combination of alleles. So now let's put this into action by using a Punnett square. So how we're going to use a Punnett square to determine the phenotypes of a monohybrid cross. So our question is, what is the phenotypic and genotypic ratio of the offspring of a monohybrid cross where capital F is freckles and lowercase f is no freckles? So the capital F is the dominant allele and the lowercase f is the recessive allele. The first thing you want to do is going to do a cross. So whenever it says you have a monohybrid cross, that means it's going to be a cross between two heterozygous alleles. So our two heterozygous alleles here are going to be a capital F and a little f crossed with a capital F and little f. The second step you're going to want to do is to write out your key. So a dominant allele for F is freckles, and if you have a lowercase allele, that'd be no freckles. And that, I mean, if you have a homozygous recessive genotype, it's going to be no freckles. And then now to use the phenotype, not the phenotype, but now to use the Punnett square to figure out the phenotypic genotypic ratio, that's what we're going to do next. So this cross is going to be coming from each parent. So the first one I'm going to represent it by this symbol here, and that means female. And the second one I'm going to show it by this symbol here, which means male. So to use your Punnett square, this is going to be composed of 4 offspring. So with this Punnett square, your genotype you're going to place on this side. On the outside is going to be the parent's genotype. So on this side, I'm going to put the female symbol, and on the outside of this square, she has one copy of a dominant allele and a copy of a recessive allele. On the top here, I'm going to put this symbol, and that represents male. And this male also has a dominant allele for F and a lowercase allele, a recessive allele. So now to complete the Punnett square, you're going to combine the two. So this first box here, you're going to have two dominant alleles, so it's going to be homozygous dominant. The one below it, it's going to be heterozygous. The top right is going to be heterozygous. And then the lower right is going to be homozygous recessive. So if you look back at the question, it's asking for the genotypic and phenotypic ratio. So to do the genotypic ratio, the best way to write this out is to write it out as a fraction. So the genotypes is referring to the different combinations of alleles. So you would have 1 out of 4 that are homozygous dominant. Then you would have 2 out of 4 that is heterozygous. And then lastly, you would have 1 out of 4 that is homozygous recessive. That's your genotypic ratio. Your phenotypic ratio is now reading your genotypic ratio and reporting out with physical characteristics. So remember that the phenotypic ratio is talking about physical characteristics. So in this case, if you have a dominant allele, this one, for instance, this one's going to be freckles. And with the heterozygous, because the recessive allele is masked by the dominant allele, it's also going to be freckles. So here you're going to have 3 out of 4 individuals that are going to have freckles, or I guess offspring is going to have freckles. And then the last one here is a recessive F. So this 1 out of 4 would be no freckles. So that's how you would complete this problem using the Punnett square.